Welcome, everyone. My name is Roxanne Young-Kimball. I'm the manager of the Residential Real Estate Development Department at the City of Minneapolis. Welcome to the Q&A session about Minneapolis Homes financing. Part of our program mission is to eliminate racial disparities in homeownership by improving opportunities to access, create, and sustain affordable homeownership. This is our second application round since we made some significant changes that were approved by our City Council. Due to feedback from residents and stakeholders, many of you participated in that feedback process. The market in Minneapolis has increased by 8%, and people's incomes have only increased at a rate of about 2.4% over the course of the past 10 years. And racial disparities in homeownership have increased during this same time period, despite our best collective efforts. Some key parts of our program change: we're doing more program pathways. We're seeking to balance wealth creation in North Minneapolis with homeowner access and the balance of the city through perpetually affordable housing. Our staff are going to walk through our program application options today. And finally, there's an opportunity to join our team. There's currently a senior project coordinator posting that's available for application. And one of the key components of that posting is to facilitate this notice of funding availability. So please help us with spreading the word about that opportunity. And with that, I'm going to introduce Kevin Canase, who's going to walk us through the presentation. Kevin?
Thank you, Roxanne, and good evening. My name is Kevin Canase, and I'm the supervisor for our CPED Single Family Project Coordination Team. And thank you for joining the question and answer session for the Minneapolis Homes Financing Program Notice of Funding Availability and our application for unfunded city-owned property. We will be recording today's session and posting it on the city's webpage at a later date with the training slides and responses to the questions that are asked this evening. Questions can be asked via the chat and then will be answered at the end of the presentation. Today, we'll be covering the goals of our program applications, including the options for purchasing city-owned property without subsidy and requesting subsidy for homeownership development projects through our Minneapolis Homes Financing Program. We'll be talking about what you need to apply, the different program options or pathways, and more details about those specific pathways. Applications will be reviewed against our current city goals for the programs, including looking at projects that are cost effective, which means that they minimize subsidy requested, maximize residential density of the project site, and are easily replicable. We want to see projects that meet local affordable housing needs, including serving households below our income restrictions, projects that provide units with more bedrooms, and developers who demonstrate historic rate of service and robust marketing to Black, Indigenous, people of color, immigrant, and disabled households. We would like to see projects with equitable wealth building opportunities, which includes things such as partnering with workforce development organizations. And finally, we want to see projects that incorporate unique design features. This could include providing access to households with disabilities or meeting sustainable design requirements above program minimums. Our program guidelines on our program webpage have more details. An applicant can apply to purchase city-owned property without subsidy or for ownership or rental development. Through either program pathway, we have a goal of providing affordable housing. Applicants intending to do homeownership development can also apply for financing on city-owned or privately owned property through the Minneapolis Homes Financing Program to develop 1 to 20 unit homeownership developments. Financing is available for homeownership units that are restricted to households at or below 80% of area median income And we'll go over what that is in just a little bit. In order to apply, there are some minimum qualifications that we want to make sure that you're achieving. And the first thing is that we want to see that you have the ability to pay for the project. Usually applicants submit a pre-approval or pre-qualification letter from a bank or lender, although other sources are accepted. And then second, we want you or someone who you are working with to show that they have recent experience doing a similar project. If you personally don't have that experience yourself, you can partner with a general contractor, developer, or you could hire a consultant to advise you on your project. And third, we want to know that you are responsible. So that means things like you don't own vacant buildings, property with rental license violations, or tax delinquent properties. And then finally, if you have existing contracts or agreements with the city, we expect that you to be performing in accordance with those agreements. In order to apply for funding, you need to complete the application documentation, including the application document itself, which includes a checklist of items that you must submit. We want to see that you have construction financing, so you would want to provide documentation that shows that you have financing to build and complete the property. And if you're applying for funding from the city, then our funding can fill any gap, or not any gap, but the remaining gaps, which we'll explain later. If you're requesting to purchase city-owned property, you would want to complete the offer to purchase. And if you're planning on using privately owned sites, we would want to see documentation of site control. You need to submit either a completed city pro forma if doing a homeownership development, or a cash flow document if doing rental. We would like to see construction plans for your development. They don't need to be full architectural drawings at this time, so preliminary sketches are acceptable. And finally, we do want to see a document that supports the value of the property that you're proposing. And this could be something such as a broker's price opinion or BPO, appraisal, or a competitive market analysis. The city has multiple city-owned development sites and vacant structures that are available for purchase. The list of available sites are broken out by 1 to 3 unit development sites and 4+ unit development sites. To purchase a city-owned site, you would submit an offer to purchase along with your application. The prices are as listed on the different lists, and they're non-negotiable. You may also apply for financing to develop privately owned sites or rehab privately owned vacant buildings for homeownership. You would provide documentation of site control, such as property ownership records, purchase agreements, or similar documentation. If you're proposing to do a stabilization proposal, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit, site control is not required. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Matthew, to talk about our city-owned unfunded property purchase program.
Next slide, please. Good evening. My name is Matthew Ramadan. I'm a senior project coordinator who will be working with you in the unfunded property purchase program. Our focus is on providing more streamlined processes for acquiring city-owned vacant structures and/or lots without any city subsidy. Please note that even without subsidy, you as the developer must still certify the household income of the occupants upon completion of your project. Next slide, please. Here we see a dilapidated 1-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family home in South Minneapolis that was purchased in 2017 for $30,000 by an owner-occupant applicant. They spent another $200,000 with their own licensed general contractor to create this 4-bedroom, 2-bath home. As you can see, looks much different than the original. Next, please. Another owner-occupant purchased this double lot in North Minneapolis for $2,800 in 2018. They hired another BIPOC general contractor to build this 2,500 square foot, 5-bedroom, 3-bath home with a detached garage for under $250,000. Ownership housing requires that 10% of units must be affordable to households with an income at or below 80% of the area median income. The sales price must be set at a price affordable to a household at 70% AMI, as published by the city annually. Ownership housing in near North and Camden communities may be initially occupied by an affordable housing purchaser with no ongoing resale restrictions. Ownership housing throughout the rest of the city must be enrolled in a perpetually affordable housing model with a 30-year affordability term renewable upon property sale. Rental housing, 20% of units must be affordable to households with an income at or below 60% AMI with adjustments for tenant utilities as posted by the city annually. Affordability of rental units must be maintained for a 30-year term. And again, as you can see, we must have collection of self-certification document of household income occupants. Next slide, please. Here we go. Please note that many neighborhoods and wards prioritize owner-occupied ownership development projects over absentee owner rental projects. So the use of the project of how you intend what the end use is very important, and that should be reflected in your application. Again, owner occupants self-certify as 80% AMI or below. At 60% AMI, a household of 4 cannot earn more than $62,940 under the rental income limits. In this chart, for example, the most you could charge as an owner of that rental housing is at 60% AMI household for a 3-bedroom unit is approximately $1,636 a month. The dates and times have been posted for the inspection of the vacant structures that we have for Thursday, December 2nd and Saturday, December 4th. Please make sure to send me an email to matthew.ramadan@minneapolismn.gov to register to attend the specific open house inspections. Masks will be required, and we do ask that you are very specific. Don't just send an email that says, we want to look at everything. And now I'm turning it back over to Kevin Canase, our supervisor for our CPED project coordinators, to talk about the Minneapolis Homes financing program.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm going to talk about our Minneapolis Homes financing program, which provides financing for 1 to 20 unit homeownership development projects. City funds pay for a portion of the project's costs based on demonstrated need. Ownership projects have 2 different types of funding that is provided by the city, and that is project gap and affordability gap. The project gap is the difference between the total cost to build the home and its fair market value. And then affordability gap is the difference between the value of the home at completion, so the fair market value, and what a home buyer can afford. The rest of the project's cost is typically financed with permanent financing, such as mortgage debt, cash invested by the owner, or funding from other affordable housing programs or sources. The full amount of assistance of both the project and affordability gap is provided by the city during construction. If you sell the home to an income eligible home buyer, the project gap is forgiven based on demonstrated need of your pro forma. Depicted on this slide are the income, affordable price, and subsidy limits of the program. The affordable price is determined using assumptions from the Metropolitan Council to determine the mortgage value an income eligible household could afford. Your application needs to demonstrate that the affordable price is either met naturally through market conditions or by requesting affordability gap subsidy to help an income eligible purchaser afford a mortgage at that value, with the city subsidy or other sources filling the affordability gap. The affordability gap combined with any project gap would need to be less than or equal to the maximum combined subsidy, which does adjust based upon the number of bedrooms of the unit created. The income limits listed on this page are based upon HUD assumptions and do adjust based upon the household size as well. You can sell the home to any household size within that income limit. An example that we're going to go over is for a 3-bedroom home in the blue box. So in this particular example, an 80% AMI household would be able to afford a $272,000 house, and the city would provide a subsidy of at max $115,000 to develop that home and then make it affordable to a home buyer or household at that income. The income limits listed in the first chart assumes that a household has one more person than the unit size created. So in this example, this is a 3-bedroom unit, and as you can see, the income limit of $79,900 matches the 80% AMI in the income limit chart of $79,900. We do update these limits annually, and the proportion affordability gap and project gap within a project can adjust, but the total subsidy that's provided by the city cannot change after council approval. The Minneapolis Homes financing subsidy includes some development requirements that projects should achieve. All projects need to meet the Green Communities criteria, which includes things like utilizing Energy Star appliances and efficient lighting. For new construction, 1 to 3 unit projects, those projects also need to meet the Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready Homes requirements. And if you're applying to do funded projects of 8 units or more, then the city's prevailing wage requirements do kick in for contractors. And then finally, additional compliance policies may apply depending on the amount of funding requested. And we encourage you to review the program manual to learn more. In addition to the subsidy limits on the previous slides, we are also piloting a sustainability certification incentive up to 20% of total development cost for ultra-efficient homes. An ultra-efficient home is one that meets one of 3 certification requirements, and that's Passive House Institute, which is an international certification, Passive House Institute US, or developing a home to the Zero Energy Ready Homes requirement, and then installing a solar array on the roof that offsets the energy needs of that home and achieves net zero energy. We encourage eligible applicants to apply for Community Housing Development Organization or Community-Based Development Organization certifications. The city receives federal funds for housing developments, and a subset of those funds are restricted to CHODOs or CBDOs, which is the acronyms. If approved, you may have access to funding restricted to these certified entities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ryan, who's going to talk about our homebuyer and homeowner support models.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan Eskin, as Kevin stated. I'm going to go over the homebuyer and homeowner support programs. First, we're going to go over some general qualifications. For any applicant that's looking to purchase a home that was part of the Minneapolis Homes finance program, there's primarily 3. The applicant must be at or below 80% area median income, as Kevin stated previously. The income for the applicant must be underwritten based on HUD Part 5 requirements, which are linked on this slide. And the home applicant or home buyer does have a minimum investment of 1% of the sales price or $1,000, whichever is greater. Next slide, please. So when a developer is listing a home for sale under two of our models, the requirements for listing the sales price do differ. For our recapture model, the sales price is based on the appraised value. Our perpetually affordable housing model does have two kind of distinctions, requirements for it. It has to be 20% below the appraised value, and also it cannot exceed the affordable price as linked here on this page. And those sales prices are updated annually and was noted previously by Kevin as well. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to just describe the models for home buyers that are buying a home through the Minneapolis Homes Finance Program. First, the recapture model. This model was developed in partnership with North community members as a result of the city owning over 300 lots in North Minneapolis alone, along which was affected due to the tornado from 2011, the devastation of the foreclosure crisis that affected North Minneapolis primarily, and passed racist policies like redlining that disproportionately affected the BIPOC communities of North Minneapolis. And additionally, our next model is the perpetually affordable housing model. This model was co-created in response to resident feedback for the additional need for perpetually affordable housing options to protect certain communities from displacement. It was created after multiple community engagement and listening sessions over the course of 2019 and 2020, with over 1,000 participants and 20 sessions. Next slide. So here are the specifics of the recapture model primarily. The amount to be received by a homeowner cannot exceed 15% of the sales price. The minimum to be provided to a home buyer is $1,000. Developer must state the amount of funds provided to a home buyer through this model on a pro forma at application. The amount provided to the home buyer is needs-based and is secured with a 0% deferred loan up to 30 years, which is a note and mortgage signed at closing. The loan that the home buyer secures is due on sale of the property from net sale proceeds. So this slide shows the example of the recapture model. If a new construction home was developed in a near North community, that home might have an appraised value of $285,000. The affordable price for someone between 61 and 80% AMI is $272,000. As a result, a home buyer needs just $13,000 of assistance in order to purchase that home. The greater the need is project gap, which is the difference in the development cost and the appraised value of a home. Project gap is provided as a 0% loan to fund the construction and forgiven upon sale to the first home buyer. Next slide, please. So here are the specifics of the perpetually affordable housing model. The home is sold at a discounted sales price of 20% or more. The home is enrolled into one of two equity sharing models selected at application by the developer, which are either the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, which limits the value increase due at home buyer sale to 25%, and is secured with a 99-year land lease, or the second option is the City of Minneapolis model. This model limits the value increase to a 2% annual increase, which is secured with a declaration of restricted covenants at land sale. There is an option for additional model. The best example would be a cooperative that could be presented to the city under this model for assistance. The City of Minneapolis model requires a qualified administrator to be selected if this is the model chosen in application. The two qualified administrators for the city is City of Lakes Community Land Trust and Build Wealth Minnesota. The fees associated to selecting those administrators is listed on this table below. I do want to note one thing is that the initial sale fee, which is noted right below the administrator line, should be included in the pro forma at application. This slide, as I stated before, showed before about Recapture, this slide goes over the perpetual affordable housing example. In this case, the project could it's a 3-bedroom home that's developed in Nokomis with average sales price of $350,000 for a 3-bed. Perpetual affordable homes provide a significant investment in affordability gap in exchange for an equity sharing formula that creates lasting affordability in most markets. So that large of investment in affordable gap can serve multiple households over time. This project could apply for 108 in Minneapolis Homes financing subsidy to make this 350 home affordable to a household below 80% AMI, which for a 4-person household is around $80,000, an investment of roughly a quarter of the home's value. If this developer or home buyer was creating a unit affordable 60 or 40% AMI and below households, the subsidy investment could increase even more substantially, and the unit would be restricted to home buyers below 60% or 40% respectively. Next slide. The last slide, the last model that I want to touch on, we'll go over stabilization, which is to be used to stabilize households at or below 80% area median income that are currently renting and or own a home that are and is higher risk of displacement. The funds for stabilization can be used to purchase naturally affordable homes and complete any needed deferred maintenance or provide affordability gap finance to low-income home buyers to purchase higher priced homes. Developers can also apply for funds to support a group of applicants, which will be needed, which if that's the case for, if that's the route that a developer wants to go down, they do have to hit on 2 things, which is describe the groups or applicants the program is intended for, or additionally provide a strategy to match homes with home buyers if providing home ownership. Under this program, any home sold to a home buyer will be enrolled in one of the city-approved perpetual affordable housing models that was previously touched on. Now I'll bring us back to Kevin for next steps.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. So our application is due on Friday, January 7th at 1 p.m. You would submit the application to Minneapolis Homes at minneapolismn.gov, and Minneapolis in our email is mplshomes@minneapolismn.gov. Proposals would then be reviewed by staff and are submitted to the neighborhood organizations for a 45-day comment and review period. You may be requested by the neighborhood to come speak about your proposal. We expect to make recommendations to City Council and make a presentation in the second quarter of 2022, and it would be after that point where the city would then contract with you if you are recommended for approval and then approved by City Council. If you are purchasing city-owned property, you would be paying a good faith deposit of either 10% of the purchase price or $2,000, whichever is greater. And then the expectation would be that units are available to the public sometime between 2023 and 2024, and the development time frame varies depending on the size of the project that you're proposing. Before we open it up and start answering questions, you can also feel free to reach out to Matthew, Ryan, and myself about specific questions about the different components of our programs. So Matthew manages our unfunded property purchase. I manage our Minneapolis Homes financing program, and then Ryan manages the stabilization component of Minneapolis Homes financing. So that concludes our presentation, and now we're going to take time to answer questions that were received in the Q&A, and then after that point, we'll see if there are any additional questions that come in.
Okay. I think, let's see. If anybody's on the phone that called in, if you do have a question, I believe you should press *6. That's correct.
That's correct, yes.
So Susan, you did have a question. The question was, this is too much to absorb at this rate. Will you be able to, for answering questions once we get a chance to reread your slides more carefully next week? Yes, Susan, you will be able to email either of us about any questions after you're able to kind of let the presentation absorb and digest.
And just to add on to that as well, we have two program web pages. One is our Minneapolis Homes financing web page under affordable ownership, and then the other is our city-owned property purchase program. And so our contact information is available at the bottom of those pages, and you can access them by going to www.minneapolishomes.org. And just to add on one additional point, part of the reason of having the application period run until January 7th is to give you time to absorb that information, and then feel free to answer questions and then get the necessary documentation that's needed to apply. And feel free to reach out to our staff as you're doing that. We also will be hosting a session on December 14th at the same time as we're doing this one that actually walks through completing the application and submitting the documentation that's required. So that might also be helpful as well.
So Kevin, I have a question from an anonymous. How is the subsidy calculated for 2 to 4 unit family dwellings? Do you just consider the value of the owner occupied portion of the dwelling?
So the subsidy that's provided is based on affordable ownership units. So if somebody's proposing a 2 to 4 unit property, they could develop it in a number of different ways. They could propose to develop all of those units as affordable ownership units that are sold to income eligible households. Then each of those units is able to access the subsidy that's depicted or was depicted on the income and subsidy limits chart that we had in our presentation. If some of those units are not being sold to income eligible households, then the subsidy would only be available for the affordable units that are restricted to 80% AMI households or below.
Thank you, Kevin. We have a question from Ade. Why is the 80% income limits of 3 people not matching up on both tables as presented by Kevin?
Sure, I can answer that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So our table is set up so that the assumption is operating under the assumption and that a 3-bedroom home has 4 people in it. So it's just using that as an example. So it showed a 4-person income limit under a 3-bedroom house. So if you're trying to determine what the actual income limit is for a household as adjusted based on household size, you would want to look at the chart at the bottom. And that's the income limits chart. And I see it looks like Roxanne is sharing her screen and going there. So the question that was received is, why does the income limit in the box where it says 3 bedrooms show 79,900? It's because the assumptions just for that house is that there's 4 people living in it. And so that's why you see that income limit, but you would use the income limits in the chart at the bottom to determine whether or not an income or a household qualifies when selling that property.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Another question from Anonymous. Considering the timeline of the last NOFA, when do we realistically think construction could start? I think Matthew might be responding to this, but
I can respond.
Okay.
So we expect to go to City Council in likely around March of next year. That's a tentative goal. So we shared in our timeline that it's likely second quarter, so it could be a little bit thereafter. And then the city would then contract with applicants sometime thereafter, most likely by summer. And so the goal would be is that you would have your contract from the city soon thereafter city council approval. That would then allow you to start completing the due diligence requirements to acquire and start construction. And so that would likely be sometime in the summer to fall timeframe, but that could vary depending on the complexity of your project. This previous round of fundings, or first round of Minneapolis Homes financing, incorporated a significant amount of program changes, and so the process was just a little bit slower. But we're smoothing out those kinks and thinking this next round will be a lot smoother.
And I added to that because unfunded property purchases are a little more streamlined, where you're not receiving city funding support, we expect that those approvals will still take place in the spring, but at the same time, right after those approvals take place, basically for either the vacant structures or the vacant land, that we expect to see construction start soon after spring, summer of 2022.
And Kevin, I apologize. MUSA or Musa. I don't want to. The question is, how do you balance award decision for prospective applicants who live in the neighborhood but are tiny contractors yet with sufficient funding for the project compared to well-established and capital-infused developers with impressive development resumes?
That is a great question, and we want to encourage all eligible applicants to apply. So we do use a scoring criteria to evaluate projects. And one of those things is looking at experience, but we also do look at meeting different city goals of serving moderate low-income households. We look at ways you're intending to market. We also look at things such as if you're coordinating with the neighborhood organizations or have development plans that are coordinated with community members. There are also criteria about design and things like that. So it's not just about if you're a developer that has a ton of experience. That's something we do look at, but we also are looking at other criteria as well. If you're a new to developer and you have questions about the program and you just want to walk through things, I am more than happy to take time with you on the phone and walk through those qualification criteria in detail and answer those questions too.
And I received a question, how much funds are available through the additional sustainability certification?
For that sustainability certification, so we provide up to 20% of total development costs, not to exceed $90,000 per unit. There's not a set amount of funds that are available. So we evaluate the proposals that are received for financing against all proposals that are received, and then use our scoring criteria to make funding recommendations. So that's how we do that, similar to kind of the answer to the last question. And we do it based on a broad subset of criteria.
And we have another question from Anonymous. Do you provide technical assistance with the application process?
That is a great question. So we are actually doing a session on December 14th. It is a Tuesday from 4:30 to 6 p.m. that walks through filling out the application and kind of goes through the different application documents, the offer, the pro forma, the application document itself, just to help kind of do some of that TA. So if you have not signed up for our Minneapolis Homes newsletter, I would encourage you to do that. Send out a notification about that last evening. And then we'll also be posting the link to that session on our webpage. And so similar to this, you can join that, ask questions, and we'll walk through completing the, how to complete the application during that session.
We received another question. This could be either for Kevin or Matthew. Can the funding be used for renovation of existing homes owned by the city?
I will answer that question. So the Minneapolis Homes Financing Program does provide financing to rehabilitate vacant structures. We are marketing some vacant buildings, and those are our city-owned property. If you want to submit an offer to purchase that building and then rehabilitate it using financing from Minneapolis Homes Financing, you could do so long as you're proposing to sell it to an income eligible household or household if you're building multiple units.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's see. Mike asked a question, will there be another round after this program? I can answer that. Yes, there will be, Mike. We have funding rounds annually, if that's correct. I believe that is correct. And we communicate those fundings out or notify funding availabilities to any interested parties from the web through the city.
Correct. We're just doing 2 this year. So that's a little bit unique. And next year we anticipate doing another application next fall. That's obviously contingent on funding availability and city commitments, but there's been good support for this program, and we've seen a lot of success in serving community members and building affordable housing, and hoping to continue that work with you into the coming years.
Another question for Kevin. You're a popular guy. Is there an order in which city subsidy is dispersed? Is it after construction financing and equity, or can it be used first?
That's a great question. So our financing is available once you close on, if you're doing acquisition of the property, you would be closing on acquisition of the property and financing. It is on a reimbursement basis, so there may be some costs that you're carrying at the very beginning, but then we're traditionally the first source in before construction financing, so that you're not carrying as much interest charges on that construction financing. And one additional point that we did present in the presentation, but want to just kind of drive home, is that we provide project gap and affordability gap. The affordability gap is also available during construction to help reduce the amount of outside financing that you need to get in order to build the property.
Susan had a question for Kevin. Are all multiple unit buildings condos or townhomes as opposed to apartments, no rentals allowed?
Our funded program, Minneapolis Homes Financing, only provides financing for homeownership development. Through our unfunded city-owned property program that Matthew is managing, where we're marketing property, both vacant lots and vacant structures, a developer could propose to do rental. They would have to comply with at least 20% of units being affordable to 60% AMI rental households. But if you're seeking funding from the city through this current round, only funding is available for ownership projects, homeownership projects.
Another question. Considering the timeline of the last NOFA, when do we realistically think construction could start?
I think we may have answered that question already, but I'll re-answer it just in case. So we anticipate contracting with developers for financing, or if they're purchasing city-owned property, next spring, early summer. And then typically developers have a due diligence period between them where they're closing on financing and or property with the city before starting construction. So the goal would be by next fall, most likely, but that will depend on the complexity of the projects.
Okay. MUSA had a question. What are the city requirements for me to develop these properties? So I think they might be able to add to the chat, but I believe they're asking if what are the general requirements for construction? If you're able to add to the chat or add another question to that.
And I'll kind of provide some basic background information about that. So the city does have different requirements you would be complying with. So if you're looking at proposing a project, it's good to check to make sure that the project complies with zoning requirements on the lots you're planning on developing. There are also construction requirements related to state building code. And then we also mentioned the green communities requirements. So those are some construction requirements that have some additional things like energy efficiency and items related to that. And then our financing has some requirements about selling to income eligible households. This might be a good question if you have more detailed questions to maybe connect offline, and then we can talk about it a little bit more in detail over the phone.
One consistent question I've gotten about twice now as I'm reading is, how do we get a list of the city-owned properties or lots for sale?
So on our webpage, we do have at minneapolishomes.org, under there's 2 different links you can click. If you're looking at just buying property and you're not asking for financing, you can click on city-owned property, and that will bring you to a list of the vacant structures that are available, and then the dates that there are open houses for those projects. And then also on that page are the lot lists or the vacant property lists, where you can see the list of properties the city is marketing. Under the Minneapolis Homes financing page, those lot lists are also listed as well. So if you click on the affordable ownership page, they're also listed there.
Rodrigo had a question. Is the subsidy transferred to the developer as part of profit?
So the subsidy is provided to fill the gap that's needed to make the project feasible. And so what that means is that, let's say you're building a home, and because of market conditions, the cost to build that home exceeds what you can sell on the open market for fair market value. The city is providing project gap to facilitate the construction of that property and produce that housing unit. And so that's what our project gap is. The affordability gap is then helping an income eligible buyer who cannot qualify for a mortgage to afford the property at the fair market value, be able to purchase that property through affordability gap subsidy. Then when you're selling the property, you may have net sale proceeds depending on the outside sources of financing that you're using, whether that's construction financing or if you're using your own equity, and may have net sale proceeds that are coming from the sale as well. Some of the developers that participate in our program also are general contractors and or realtors, and we do allow for fees for self-performing general contractors up to a specific limit, as well as for realtors as well.
Let's see. Susan had a question if owner-occupied apartment buildings can be part of this program.
So if somebody was purchasing a building that they're planning to occupy and rent out units, if their income meets the income limits, that would be possible. The challenge that may come in is that we do look at the income that's received from rents as a calculation method for determining household income. And so that may or may not put the household over the income limits. We do look at the net income, so looking at the rental income received minus the expenditures of that household or of that housing rental unit to determine that. So it's possible, but it's something you would want to look at, looking at the numbers, looking at the income limits, and also taking a look at our pro forma. It does have a section where you can look at how that rental income is calculated.
Okay. Question from the chat. The affordability gap is given to the developer for construction. It seemed like the affordability gap is made available to the buyer. Can you clarify this further? I think that might have been touched on about the profit question we had above.
Sure. So we provide both project gap and affordability gap during construction as construction financing. When you draw on that affordability gap during construction, and then you sell to an income eligible household, you would then be bringing those city's dollars that you drew on to the closing table. And so that's how that works, is that the city is allowing you to then, or is allowing you to first draw on those dollars during construction. And then when you're going to home buyer closing, you're then bringing those funds to the closing table.
The question, is there a scoring matrix available for the creation of proposals?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
The question was, is there a scoring matrix available for creation of proposals?
Sure. So on our Minneapolis Homes financing webpage, we have both our program manual as well as our program guidelines. The program guidelines is probably going to be easier. And on that page, I think it's on the second page of that document, we have, or actually it's the third page, we have a section called criteria for selection. And under that, it lists those 4 criteria that I mentioned, but then provides some additional information about more detail about kind of how we evaluate those different sections.
Mm-hmm. Another question from the chat. If we are awarded to purchase vacant lots and need additional funding from Minnesota Housing or any other additional funding source, when would we be required to have our new development completed? Often these new construction projects take over 3 to 4 years. Looking to build new construction on vacant land that would be supportive, affordable housing.
That's a great question. It would depend on the proposal received and the number of units. So we do have some specific timeframes for development, but we do understand that, especially on more complex projects, that there may be some additional fundraising that's required. If you're looking at proposing something and you're thinking that you may be having some tentative funding that's not available, you can include that in your pro forma. The thing to make sure is when you're submitting your application, you're being very clear about explaining those details.
I believe, let's see. Matthew, I believe, I'm not sure if you answered this in the chat, but some of the vacant buildings are over 100 years old. Is it acceptable to demolish building and build new construction city-owned unfunded properties?
Sure. The answer to that question is that the developer or the applicant should consider the cost of acquisition and demolition versus the cost of building on a already vacant lot. However, there's at least one property, 4901 Vincent Avenue North, which is an alley house, 1 bedroom, 1 bath that has full of asbestos and everything, that the city is expecting that whoever acquires that will tear that down and build new construction at that site.
Mm-hmm. And I believe there's a question from Zach. How long do I have to wait if I want to sell a funded property? And Zach, I'm wondering if you're wondering about if you're the developer or if a home buyer. So I guess Kevin, you can touch on the developer side, but.
So if you're doing a funded homeownership project, part of the expectation of that is that you are marketing that property on the MLS. and you're doing that for at least 10 business days so that you're providing the opportunity for the public to view and submit an offer for that property. We do want you to, as doing that, market that it's a Minneapolis Homes funded project and that there is affordability gap financing that's available. And so that would be marketing the amount of funding that the city was providing. And I'm thinking this question may be about if you're selling it to a buyer and they're getting city down payment assistance, how long they have to keep the property. So if you're getting down payment assistance through the recapture method, then that property or those funds would be recaptured or repaid to the city after sale or no longer being occupied by the eligible household that purchased that property. And then if you're doing resale, you would then be reselling it through one of the methods that Ryan described through our perpetually affordable housing program. And that would then be sold to an income eligible household. And then a new declaration of restrictive covenants or a land lease would be recorded through one of those perpetually affordable housing models.
And one of the last questions in the chat that I'm seeing is, are some of the criteria for selection weighted differently than other criteria? Example is cost effectiveness worth more than PHIUS certification?
We don't assign specific points to the different selection criteria. So when we're doing an evaluation of projects, we review those projects collectively against each other and then review them against those broader criteria to see which projects are meeting the greatest city goals. And that includes looking at that cost effectiveness as well as if projects are meeting additional certifications for ultra efficient home design. So we do look at multiple things and we're not necessarily weighting them differently. There's multiple criteria, so that's part of the reason for that.
Okay. I don't show any other new questions in the chat.
Someone asked a question about other city properties that are not listed, other vacant city properties. Mike asked this question: is only the current list city-owned vacant properties available for this program? Because there's a city-owned vacant property that I'm interested in, but not on the current list. Mike, it may be that particular property, whether it's a vacant structure or a vacant piece of land, may already have a redevelopment contract actively involved with it, or it may be slated for another type of redevelopment. And so it may not be available for those reasons, or it may be slated for future development. Some properties are not listed because they are currently community gardens, for instance, or they may be part of a larger, assembly redevelopment down the road. But we ask people to specifically target and look at the quite extensive list of properties that we have available on this list in order to move forward as far as their application is concerned.
Question came in the chat. Is county grants or deed grants, can they be used for these properties or development? Good question for you, Kevin. Sure.
You can definitely use other sources of financing or grants on these projects, and actually we are supportive of that. The one thing you do want to keep in mind is that you're not layering other city sources. So that's the challenge, is if you're layering other city programs along with these. But if you're using county grants, deed grants, state funding, those are all things that you can propose. And so we would just want you to document that on your pro forma and then include documentation of that as part of your application. And then if it's something where it is pending, then we would want you to clearly articulate that as part of your application on your pro forma.
We received a question from in the chat. Is there funding for building a tiny home or on my own property, a corner house with plenty of land?
Our program does not restrict the type of properties built other than it would be 1 to 20 unit structures. If you're looking at a tiny home or something similar to that, I encourage you to reach out to our zoning folks by calling 311. The reason for that is the zoning restrictions may be applicable and may prevent that in some cases. And then if you're looking at doing an accessory dwelling unit, so that would not be possible because that could not be sold to an income eligible household if you're already occupying the property. You could propose to do that, but then if you're looking at purchasing like a city-owned property that Matthew's marketing, and you're looking at building an additional unit on that site, that would be possible. But if you're looking at building an ADU on your own property, that wouldn't meet the requirements of the program to sell it to an income eligible household.
I wanted to address, this is Roxanne. I wanted to address a question that we saw in the chat that we also responded to in the chat. There is not funding available through this NOFA process for rental property. You can apply for an unfunded property. So if there's city land that you'd like to purchase in order to develop rental property, you can certainly do that. However, if your intent is to apply for city-owned property and then request funding through our rental programs, that is not something that's permitted through this process. There will be a request for proposals process for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It typically happens each spring.
We received another question in the chat. Is new construction techniques are allowed? Mobile homes, prefab homes and vacant lots.
We do encourage various and new methods of construction. That is somewhat of a building code question, more so than a financing question. So I'd encourage you to reach out to 311 and our zoning and code administration folks could answer that question for you.
Okay. And if anybody has any other questions, please type in the chat.
I see a question on here in the chat. Anonymous, is there a program for low-income family who want to buy a home through the city?
Brian, did you want to take that question?
Sorry, I was looking for it. Yes, we do offer. Additionally, outside of this program, we do offer home buyer down payment assistance programs called Home, which is called Home Opportunity Minneapolis. That program offers up to $20,000 in down payment assistance to buy any home within the city limits. Those are administered by 2 other organizations. I can definitely provide that information to you if you want to shoot me an email from the slide, and I can definitely get that information over to you. Roxanne, what did you mention that happens in the spring?
Yes, that's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. application process for rental properties. And I see that there's a few more questions that came in. I was gonna say thank you everyone and good night, but I see there's a few more questions that came in, so we'll stick around.
Yeah, one question was general for Kevin. Is general contractor must be approved by the city of Minneapolis to bid the properties?
Oh, sure. So if somebody is looking to purchase a city-owned property, either they would need to be showing that they have experience developing that property or that type of property through their recent experience from the past 2 years, or they would want to be partnered with a general contractor that has that experience. So you don't have to be a licensed general contractor to apply, but you do need to show that you have recent experience doing a similar level of construction or development. And then when you are actually looking at acquiring the property and building, you would need to have a licensed general contractor working with you to complete that project. So the main takeaway is that these properties aren't for like do-it-yourselfers. We want to make sure that if you're acquiring the property that you have a clear plan for redeveloping it so that it's a property that's redeveloped and positively impacting the community.
And another question from somebody in the chat, which we might need some more clarity on. So you have to sell the multifamily property to a low-income person?
So if somebody is acquiring a multiple unit property or building a multiple unit property, there's kind of two different methods. If you're doing unfunded, so you're not requesting funding from the city, then you can either sell those units to households, and at least 10% of the units have to be to 80% AMI households, and that would be like a townhome or condominium type of situation. Or you can rent those units, and at least 20% of the units that are rented have to be at rates that are affordable to 60% AMI households, and those households also have to be 60% AMI. So that would be if you're doing a multiple unit unfunded project, you can do either ownership or rental. And then if you're doing a funded project, that would be restricted to an income eligible household that purchases the property, and you could sell it through two different ways. You could either sell the entire structure to an income eligible household. We would need to look at the rental income kind of assumptions that come along with that. And so depending on the cost of the property, that may or may not be possible. The other option would be is if you're doing like a townhome or twin home or something like that, and you're selling those individual units, you could sell those individual units to income eligible property or households.
Thank you, Kevin. Another question, is subcontracting allowed in these projects? For Kevin.
I'm not sure I quite understand the question, but generally speaking, so if you are being funded as a developer to build a new construction property, you would go through a bid process. And if you're a general contractor, then you would be bidding for subcontractors. If you do not have a licensed general contractor that you've picked for your project or that you're working with, then you would be bidding for both the general contractor, and then they would be submitting a bid for their services plus the subcontractors that they're working with. I'm not sure if that answered the question or not, so feel free to kind of ask a clarifying question, but hopefully it did.
All right. Steph had a question. I'm looking for vacant land addresses, but on the city-owned unfunded property purchase, but the vacant land section is grayed out, and am I doing something wrong? Matthew.
Okay. Can you repeat the question again? I don't see it here, so I just want to make sure I get it right.
Yeah, Steph had a question. I'm looking for vacant land addresses, but on the city-owned unfunded property screen website link, to purchase, but the vacant land section is grayed out. Am I doing something wrong?
I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
Make it a little bit easier for hopefully answering this question. So this is the city unfunded property page. And then if you click this, it's going to bring you down to this section right here. So if you're looking at a 1 to 3 unit city-owned development site, you would click this and it's going to expand and show you a map with a list of properties. This is going to include both the city-owned vacant sites and then city-owned vacant buildings. And so if you wanted to download this list, you can actually click the download button. And then from there, you would click download here. And then when you do that, you're going to want to actually download it. If you want it in Excel, you would click crosstab and then it can download as an Excel file. Otherwise, you could download it as a PDF or image.
Another question in the chat. I want to purchase a lot and build an owner-occupied triplex. Can I apply for this subsidy? Kevin.
Great question. Yes, you can apply for the subsidy. As part of your application, you would need to self-certify your income. And when you're completing the pro forma, you're going to show your project costs, but then you're also going to show the rental calculation. And we would be looking at net rent received as part of that income calculation. So make sure that you're keeping that in mind to see whether or not your income meets or is below the income restrictions.
Matthew, this question is for you. For a 4-unit rental city unfunded property, 1 unit 60% AMI rental and 3 units rental for regular people?
For a 4-unit that's rental, it has to be at least 20% of the units. So that, I think you've got it, yeah, because that would be 25%. You would have hit it.
And there's a follow-up question, Matthew. If you build a 4-unit property with city funding, do you have to sell the entire property considering you can't rent the units?
You have to sell the entire property considering you cannot rent the units. The only other option would be.
That actually might be more of a Kevin question because it's about with city funding. Kevin, you want to take
city funded,
Sorry, I apologize. I was looking at sending a link to one of the questions and I didn't hear the question. Would you mind repeating it for me?
Sure. If you have city funding and you build a 4-unit property, do you have to sell the entire property considering you can't rent the units?
So if you're building a 4-unit property and you're requesting city funding, you either need to sell the entire property or the individual units as like condominiums or townhomes to income eligible households.
And I'll add on to that a little bit. If you're building a multi-unit property, and you're asking for ownership financing through our program, you have the option to ask for financing for as many affordable homeownership units as you're creating. So if you're only creating 1 affordable homeownership unit, you could ask for funding for 1 unit. If you're going to create condos, or if you're going to do a townhome development like Kevin was speaking to, then you could apply for all 4 of the units. It would be up to your discretion.
Okay. One of the last remaining questions that came up through the chat, is there any monetary penalty if projects are not completed on stipulated time frames? Kevin.
Sorry, I was doing the same thing again where I was trying to reply. So our contract does have some provisions where there are fees charged if you do not close on acquisition of the property within a certain time frame that's set within our program manual. And then also if you do not complete construction and sell to an income eligible household. We do evaluate extension requests on projects based on extenuating circumstances. A recent example would be projects that were funded during the pandemic, for example. We did extensions or waivers to the fees charged related to extensions due to challenges with securing contractors and costs related to lumber and other materials. So that we are willing to work with you. Our contracts do have those requirements, and I don't want to say that we waive them in all situations, but we do evaluate things on a case-by-case basis.
One of the questions, oh, I see the question you're responding to, Kevin. I see that. Okay, all right. Okay, well, that's all the questions we received. So I will throw back to Roxanne, it looks like, for the close of the presentation.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who participated in the question and answer session today. We certainly recognize that there's a lot to take in, so I strongly encourage you to reach out to our staff that are ready to help and support you as you try to think through which pathway you want to pursue and start to think through our application process. Again, there will be a additional session that happens in December that's going to walk through more specifically how to fill out the application itself. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Good luck on the application. We look forward to working with you.